Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this very hot Wednesday afternoon. And in this segment, in this podcast, we are going to be talking about several things. Mainly, the Olympics, since the games are happening right now as we speak. And, right now, Serbia is currently kicking Puerto Rico to the curb. Like, it's really, really bad. Like, it's really bad. The score is 85-51 right now in the fourth quarter with Serbia winning. It is just a blowout. Puerto Rico's looking like one of the worst teams in this group stage. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about that in a later segment. But for the first segment, I'm going to talk about the results of the game between Germany and Brazil, because that game happened yesterday after my podcast and I wasn't able to cover it. I did cover a little bit of the French game, but I'm going to just refresh everyone's memory in that first segment as well. Then in the third segment, I'm going to talk about a new thing that I just found. There is apparently a FIBA MVP, and there is like an award that you can win. And people vote on this award. So I'm just going to go ahead and look at the athletes in the top 10 and further down. But yeah, I'm just pretty interested in the fact that there is an actual MVP award. So I'm going to talk about that. Then in the second segment, I'm going to go take a trip to the past and talk about why the Carmelo Anthony and Paul George move in OKC didn't work, because I used to be a pretty big fan of that team and just the players that they were composed of. And then in the fourth segment, I'm going to go ahead and, recap Serbia beating off Puerto Rico, because I'm pretty sure that this game is going to end well before the third segment even starts. So you guys are going to get completely raw information coming in, literally right after the game concludes. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. And then we also have a special fifth segment at the end of the fourth segment that I like to reveal. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And as always, remember to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That is GSMCpodcast.net. It helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCpodcast.net. And without further ado, let's go right ahead and just recap all of the things that's been going on in the Olympics as of right now. So, one thing that I found out about 30 minutes ago was that there are already teams that have qualified for a spot in the Olympics, in the final phase of the tournament, right? So in Group A, Canada is the only team that has qualified for a spot. So, and the way that it works is that there's a point system for these standings. So if you win, you get 2 points. If you lose, you get 1 point. So Canada has 4 points, and I believe the team that reaches 4 points first ends up being the team that qualifies. So the two teams that get to 4 are the two teams that are going to be qualified for the spot. So Canada has 4 points, Australia has 3, and so now you just have to win. You just have to win the next game if you're Australia and you already qualify, because Spain also has 3, so it's pretty close in that department. For Germany and France, they are the only teams that have advanced in Group B, because they're the only teams there that have 4 points. And finally, for Group C, the United States and South Sudan are the two top teams in the running, but since they haven't played yet, we cannot tell exactly who is going to take that spot and who is going to, because the way I see it, only one team is going to qualify from Group C. Then it's going to follow the same pattern as Group A is doing right now, where it has one team in 4, another team in 3, another team in 3, and then finally the bottom feeder at 2. And that's sort of the point system that I figured out in just a few minutes ago. So those are the qualifying teams, and as I said before, Germany, they ended up beating the Brazilian team in this recent matchup. They won 86-73, And, since they already qualified, there's really no need to talk about point differential in this one. But obviously, their point differential was going to increase dramatically after this huge win. So I believe, their point differential, it moved from... All right, so they had a plus 20 point differential before playing this game, and they won by 13. So that would mean now they have a plus 33 point differential, which is, it's very impressive, right? But that would also mean that Brazil now has one of the lowest point differentials at minus 25, I believe. Yeah, because they had minus 12 in the previous after the previous loss, and now they just added minus 13 more. So that is about minus 25 in the point differential. And so it's right now they're just fighting for glory, and they aren't really fighting for anything special because, they've already been eliminated, which is unfortunate for them. And, I mean, it's to be expected. I mean, Brazil doesn't really have the same amount of talent as Germany has or as France has in their bracket. So, they were kind of doomed from the start because of their standing. Similar to how it seems like Puerto Rico was doomed from the start, because Puerto Rico is looking like one of the weakest teams in not just the entire Group C standings, but in the entire Olympics period. Losing, but they're almost about to lose by 40. This is really bad. And to make matters worse, their point differential is already in the minus 11. That was their point differential before even going into this game. Now they're going to be just awful. This is going to be terrible for them. Now this also really helps. This matchup also really, really helps Serbia get back into the race and taking the next spot for the tournament in the Group C standings, because as the Group C standings are right now, it's America, South Sudan, Puerto Rico, and Serbia, right? So that would mean that with this plus 40 point differential, if they win and South Sudan loses, they're going to go ahead and advance into the second seed, all the way from being down in the first seed. But I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next segment after I believe, in the fourth segment, once the game finally concludes, because now I'm just spitballing right here. So for Germany, Franz Wagner played very, very well, ended up getting 17 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists. And he's been playing phenomenally for Germany throughout the entirety of the Olympic tournament. Same with Dennis Schroeder. Everyone knows that Olympic Dennis Schroeder is a lethal weapon, and they also know that Dennis Schroeder in an NBA team can also be a lethal weapon. So it's he's one of the few players on the German team that has, NBA experience. Same with Franz Wagner. They both have NBA experience. And Schroeder played a very efficient 20-point game. He was 7 for 13 from the field, was able to get 6 assists on top of those 20 points, which is always great and always what you would expect from a point guard. He did get 5 turnovers, however, but aside from that, doesn't really matter because his production to the team was more than enough to grant them that win. And it's since they already qualified, it's it's really it's almost no point in talking about the rest of the games coming up against Germany or the rest of the games coming up in that specific bracket because of how the standings are, and just and the fact that everyone in that group has already qualified, and it doesn't really seem like it's really interesting anymore, because it's really not. We already know what team is going to advance and what team is not going to advance, because even if they play against each other, I'm not let's say Germany and France play against each other, because that is probably going to be the only matchup that's really worth seeing after the results of this, of these games ended up playing out. So it's it's kind of unfortunate, because that's how, oh wow, okay, Puerto Rico just took a wild shot. But aside from that, it's there's nothing in this Group B. It's basically done. Like, there's nothing else to talk about. But Group A and Group C, those two are going to be like the groups that I'm going to be focusing on a little bit more, because it seems like, again, like, I don't think anyone would really want to listen to me talk about these games that don't really mean that much. But I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. If I should just, focus on recapping every game, or only focus on recapping some of the games that end up, happening in the, like, that end up being important. And speaking of importance, there is a new tweet coming out. Woes just dropped some knowledge, so I'm just going to go ahead and read what Woes just tweeted out, because I'm actually very curious myself. All right, so I just found out Luke Kennard has agreed to a new 1-year, $11 million contract to stay with the Memphis Grizzlies. And I'm kind of surprised that it's just for, 1 year. I would have expected him to want to sign, a multiple, like a year, like a contract worth multiple years, as opposed to just, this 1-year contract for $11 million. But this is like, this is a pretty big deal, because Memphis is going to be they're looking to be a playoff team, right? And they're trying to compete against some of the toughest things in the, like, they're in one of the toughest conferences. That's what I've been trying to say. I don't know why I'm fumbling so badly, but they've been in one of the toughest conferences in the NBA, and so they're gonna need, like, all the floor spacing that they can get, especially now that they have Zach Edey on the team. Just, because, like, you have to do that. I mean, it doesn't make any sense not to do that. And honestly, like, I kind of like this move. Like, for Memphis, it's always good to, like, make sure you retain your shooters, but at the same time, I would have really liked to see them, sign them for more. And that was a very wild shot, but okay. So that's basically all that I have to talk about in this segment. So yeah, the German game, that was, it was a blowout from the start. The game was never close, so I just don't really feel the need to talk about it all that much. So now we will go ahead and go into the second segment, where I talk about the FIBA Basketball MVP. Yeah, there is a list of players that are in the running to win the FIBA Basketball MVP, and I'm just going to talk about those players that are in the top 10, and maybe go on a little bit more of some of the players in, like, maybe, the top 25, something like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about that right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned, and I'll be right back. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, I'm going to talk about the list of the FIBA MVPs. Like, there's a whole poll of the, who they want as and who they're voting for as the FIBA MVP for this Olympic basketball tournament. And I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the players in the top 10 and just my opinions on that and, just everything about the award. Before I begin, however, I'd like to remind everybody to please go ahead, use the link in the description to get your comments recognized and the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. GSMCpodcast.net really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. And without further ado, let's go right ahead and go into this second segment. Also, the score for the Serbian game against Puerto Rico right now, it's 100-62. So I'm probably going to talk a little bit about that, maybe in the third segment, depending on when this, because there's 1 minute left in this game. So I'll probably move it from the fourth segment over to the third segment instead of, talking about the third segment first, and then I'll just switch the two of them because I don't think it's really that big of a deal. And we are on a roll with Olympic basketball right now, so I might as well go ahead and continue to talk about it before I focus on something that previously happened. So in this, hold on, because let me go ahead and fix the light real quick because I don't know why it's lowering the brightness. There we go. So the FIBA MVP, I'm not even going to lie, that is something that I have never heard of. Like, I've never really paid that much attention to the Olympics when I was a toddler before, and I honestly had no idea that there was an award for the FIBA, like for FIBA basketball and being the MVP. I figured there was like some sort of way that you get recognized, but I didn't think there was actually a FIBA MVP. Like, I'm gonna try and figure out when the FIBA MVP started, like when did the award first get handed out. But apparently this is like in the FIBA Basketball World Cup, this is obviously there's a thing like that. So I understand it in the World Cup, but I didn't realize that there was there was one for the Olympics as well. Like, I didn't realize that they also had a poll for Olympic players to win the MVP. I thought it was just for FIBA, but turns out it's for every single form of international basketball that could ever exist, right? So with that in mind, it also surprised me who was in number one on this list. Spoiler alert, it's not LeBron. It used to be LeBron, but now it's not. For some reason, the number one, the athlete with the most votes on this list, this is only this is a vote for the fans. The way that the FIBA basketball MVP works is that the vote is divided between three outlets: the fans, the media, and the league's coaches. So they have each 1/3 of a say in who should get the MVP, right? And now this seems like the Puerto Rican game is ending. There's 9 seconds left. The final score is looking to be 107-66. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that game in the third segment. And so for the MVPs, right, for the FIBA basketball MVPs, the number one player on this list is Leo Miendel, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, for the Brazilian team. He has 9,621 votes. And you're probably wondering, why is he ranked number one? And this answer is going to shock you as much as it shocked me before. I don't know. I have no idea why this athlete has the most votes. I genuinely have no idea. Other than maybe it's because, he is Brazilian and there's so many people in Brazil and so many so many Brazilians, they love to just vote for the best player. And that's really the only thing that I can really think about. That's the only thing that I can think about, because the fact that he has more votes than LeBron, Doesn't make any sense to me. And you might think, okay, well, maybe he's playing. And I thought to myself, like, I genuinely thought to myself, looking at this list at first, that, like, oh, well, maybe he had some fantastic performances in all of these games. No, he didn't. In the last game that he played against Germany, he went 2 for 12 and only had 6 points. And he also went 1 for 9 from inside the arc and 1 for 3 from outside the arc. He's literally only hit 2 shots in yesterday's game. And then in the game before that, because, he played a game before that, I'm just going to try and find the box scores real quick of the game before that. Brazil, they played France, right? And his box score, let's go ahead and read his box score. He ended the game with 14 points and was 5 for 13 from the field. So I have no idea why him, of all the athletes that they could have voted for, is number one. I genuinely have no idea. He has had the worst efficiency rating on his team, also the worst box plus minus on his team, and everything about him is just like, honestly, it might be a troll pick. That might be what it is, because if you guys remember, not really if you guys remember, but it's like everyone in these basketball votings, they love to be trolls. Like, I remember all the way back in, I want to say maybe 2017, maybe 2018, probably 2017. The player that had the second most votes from the fans was Zaza Pachulia. Like, Zaza Pachulia, the guy that has never done anything on the Warriors, like arguably the weakest link on the Golden State Warriors when they won in 2017 in the entire starting lineup. He had the second most votes. He had more votes than Kawhi Leonard, more votes than like Anthony Davis, and he was just not it. He was not the kind of player, and he was still second in the voting. So I feel like this is sort of like the same example. I think it's a troll pick, because there's no way that a player like him should have more votes than the player that's second on this list, LeBron James. Like, LeBron is second in MVP voting on this list. I would have never thought I'd see the day, and he has 9,243 votes as of right now. Again, I had no idea whether or not the votes are going to increase later on during the day or if they're going to stay the same. But this is the voting, and this is, who's second on the list. Obviously, he should be first. And the player right after him, Kevin Durant, definitely should be in the running as well. And, being the two best players on the Olympic team, it would make sense that these two are holding the 2 and the 3 spot. They should really hold the 1 and the 2 spot, but, people want to be funny. Now, Giannis Antetokounmpo, he is 4th on this list, and quite frankly, the only thing that's really holding him back from winning this MVP, in my opinion, is the fact that his team is still winless. Like, he still has yet to give Greece a win, but you can't really blame him, because in every single game he's dropped at least 28 points or more, and he's also been able to get a double-double in all of his games as well. Like, his performance is nothing to really mess with. Like, it's really just, he's playing phenomenal basketball. And really, if he would have won in any of those games, like if he would have won in the first game, maybe if he would have won in the second game and advanced his team, he would have definitely had a good shot at winning this thing, in my opinion. Next on this list for number 5 is Jose Alvarado. Now, he is the best player on the Puerto Rican squad, but the fact that Puerto Rico has lost by double digits in almost every single game that they've played in, don't think he should be in this list at all. Same applies with Tremont Waters for the Puerto Rican team again. I don't think anybody on the Puerto Rican team should even be on this poll. Now, and it really stinks, because the two other players below them are both playing for South Sudan. So you have Carlick Jones. He should definitely be in the running for the most valuable player, just because of what he's doing for South Sudan. And same with Wenyen Gabriel. He got some popularity for talking and spreading his opinions about playing for South Sudan. And, of course, the two big men that should always be in the MVP running for international basketball, Victor Wembanyama and Nikola Jokic, they're both in the 9 and the 10 spot on this list. And Directly below him, directly below Jokic, again in the voting, is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So it's been really tough for Shai. He hasn't even been the best player on his team, but he's still in the top voting for MVP. Again, this is the fans voting, like the fans and their opinions. So it makes sense why, like some of these players are on this list early. I mean, Victor makes total sense for being on this list, but players like Jose Alvarado and players like Waters and players like this guy right here shouldn't be on this list at all. Like, I'm sorry to say it, but if you cannot lead your team to wins, and if you're not even scoring 30 points in the Olympics, I'm sorry, you should not even be considered for an award like this. And unless you have to be winning, you got to be winning. And I'm not really a big fan of these, of this poll. Again, this is just the fan voting, so it makes sense why the poll is really, really bad. But how can it, what are we doing? What are y'all doing? That is really the big question that I have, because what on earth is going on? Why do you have to vote for this player when you just, he doesn't deserve it? But I digress. So that's really all that I have to say about the FIBA MVP list. Really, it was just, me getting upset at the fact that LeBron James wasn't in number one, because it genuinely doesn't make any sense. I literally have never heard of that Brazilian dude up until now. I've never heard of Leo Mendil before up until now. And his performances haven't warranted me to even, figure out who he was. His performances were atrocious in these previous games. And he does have a history of playing really well for the Brazilian team. I'm not going to deny that, but it's just not needed after these last few games. They're both losses, and they're both horrible losses, as a matter of fact. So that's all that I really have to say. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go into the next segment, which I said was going to be a review of the previous game between Serbia and Puerto Rico. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about that in the next segment right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I'm going to be talking about the Serbian game, the game between, Serbia and Puerto Rico. Literally just concluded about, I want to say maybe 15 minutes ago. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about, my thoughts on the game as it was happening, and since I was watching the game while I was doing this segment, and really, this is, this game was bad. This game was awful. Look at that score. That scoreboard doesn't lie. The game was never, ever close. From the start of the game all the way to the end of the game, Serbia knew they were going to win this, and this is you can call this whatever you want. You can call it a revenge game because they previously lost to the United States team. And obviously, losing in this tournament, it's not really, voice crack, good lord. It's not really something that, people are going to take lightly. A lot of foreign countries really love to play in the Olympics, because this is the one time where they get to represent their country on a huge global scale. And it means a lot to these people. So getting blown out like that to the United States is definitely a little bit demoralizing. So this could be seen as sort of like, a revenge game for them. Now, this loss has, this game has told me two things. So for one, Serbia is definitely not out of this race. They're definitely not out of the playoff race at all. Despite their loss to the United States, they're not out. And this game, it helps them not just getting a win, but also in the point differential category. Because now if South Sudan ends up losing the next game against the United States, this game that Serbia had is most likely going to help their point differential, so that way they can get into that second seed as opposed to getting into the third seed. Because South Sudan, if the United States beats South Sudan, most likely the South Sudan's point differential is going to drop dramatically. And by dramatically, I mean it could drop by, maybe 15 points. And that would put them in the third spot on the Group C standings as opposed to being in the second spot. Because this blowout game, it really, really helps Serbia. And the other thing that this sort of matchup told me about was that, and I call it a sort of matchup because it wasn't really a matchup. I mean, look at the score. The game was over right when the ball jumped off, right when tip-off. The only time that Puerto Rico scored 20 points in a quarter was the second quarter. They scored 12 in the first, then they scored 13 in the third, and then 15 in the fourth. Meanwhile, Serbia scored 20 plus in literally every single quarter of the game. And it's just it's really, really bad. It was a horrible game to watch. It was so boring. Puerto Rico never led at all in throughout the entirety of this game. They never led. From start to finish. And the biggest lead that Serbia had was 41. And it was just awful. They just destroyed them. And you can't you really can't make up this kind of performance. It was just a really bad night for Puerto Rico. I mean, nobody shot the ball well. They were turning the ball over way too much, and that was really one of the biggest problems. They had 14 turnovers in this game on top of just, missing practically every single three-pointer that they took and every single, two-pointer that they took. It was they were missing layups. They've shown that they're arguably the weakest team in the entirety of the Olympics. Not to mention, they already don't have that many players that have NBA talent, compared to Serbia or compared to, the only team that has as many as they do is Greece, and they have one. And they still have more players with NBA experience on that roster. It's not looking good. It's really not looking good for Puerto Rico. And with this win for Serbia, now their point differential is plus 15. So if you remember before, they had the worst point differential in the entire Group C standings, and now they have the second best point differential in the entire Group C standings. And so now what they have to do is they just have to hope that South Sudan loses, because once South Sudan loses, then they're going to move up to the second seed almost immediately, because South Sudan only has a box plus minus of, well, not a box plus minus, only has a point differential of 11. So the fact that they have the lower point differential is going to be a very huge factor in Serbia making its way to the tournament. So now they have to hope that the United States beats South Sudan. They don't have to beat them by much. They just have to beat them. And once that happens, then they'll hold the spot for the number 2 seed, and they should be fine. It should be smooth sailing from there on out, because they already, lost to the United States. Then they beat Puerto Rico, so now they have to play South Sudan, and depending on who wins in that game is going to advance all the way to the next round. Now, if by some miracle the United States loses to South Sudan, Like, I mean, I shouldn't really call it a miracle because they came really close if it wasn't for LeBron to losing to South Sudan. So, by some wild chance that ends up happening, then that would mean that South Sudan is going to be 2-0 and they would qualify for a spot, right? That would mean they immediately qualify because, you'll get 4 points and you immediately qualify. And then the United States, they would fall down to 1-1. They would still be in the second spot because of their point differential. And guess what team the United States plays last? Puerto Rico. So, if by some miracle the United States lose in this game against South Sudan, they're going to wipe the floor with Puerto Rico, and they're still going to make it to the, all the way through this bracket. They're going to make it through the Group C standings, and Serbia is not going to be able to do anything about it. Because, South Sudan, they would have to go up against Serbia, but they would have nothing to lose. Because they would already be qualified for the spot. So, with all of that in mind, Serbia they desperately need the United States to win. Desperately need it. Because that way, they control their own destiny. They control, whether or not they make it to the next round or not. Same with South Sudan. They will control whether or not they make it to the next spot or not if they lose to the United States, as well as if they play Serbia next, or when they play Serbia next. That's really what they're fighting for. They're just trying to fight to compete, right? And for Serbia's case, they're trying to control their destiny, and the only way to do that is for the United States to end up winning, because then the Puerto Rican game, between the United States and Puerto Rico, that's just going to be like a scrimmage for the United States. They're going to, with how Puerto Rico has been playing in these standings, I think they're going to wipe the floor with them. But that's just my opinion on it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, but this is sort of how it's going to go. So, if Serbia wants a chance, they're going to have to hope that the United States wins. And if the United States loses, they're going to have to hope that the United States doesn't win against Puerto Rico. And that's just not going to happen. So if the United States lose, Serbia's road and Serbia's hopes for making it all the way are going to be for nothing. They're just not going to be able to do it. They just won't. And really, the biggest killer for them was the point differential between the United States and Serbia. That was really the killer for them. If the point differential wasn't that staggering, then they would have a shot. But because of the vast point differential, and because of the fact that the United States is most likely going to have a really, really high point differential when going up against Puerto Rico, it's just a lost cause. So they have to hope that the United States wins. That way they can control their fate going up against South Sudan. Very important. And South Sudan, obviously, if you're South Sudan, you want to beat the United States because you came so close to doing it in the last game. You got to try and do it now. But if they lose to the United States, it's not the end of the world, because then they can go up against Serbia and try to beat them there. And then they would also control their destiny. So that's sort of the thought process going into these next games. And that's really that's how the Group C standings are looking at right now. So essentially, United States has to win. And then when the United States win, we're going to get a very, very competitive standoff between South Sudan and Serbia. It is going to be so much fun. But aside from that, that is all that I have on this third segment. So now I will go ahead and go into the fourth segment, where I talk about why the Carmelo Anthony and the Paul George run on Oklahoma City didn't work out, because I saw an article talking about it, so I'm just going to go ahead and look at it with all of you guys and just give my opinions on it, and I'll do that right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, I'm going to talk about why all of these players, like Carmelo Anthony and Paul George, it seems like they're all saying that they're giving reasons why the Paul George and the Melo move didn't work out. I believe this was on a Paul George's podcast, and I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about what the article is saying. And for the reason why I'm doing this is just because, I liked the team. I liked the Melo being on the Thunder. I'm a big Carmelo Anthony fan. I mean, I've watched him when he was on the Knicks, and his little, his jab steps and contested mid-ranges. I just, I don't know why it was so fascinating to me, I don't know why the jab stepping and the constant mid-range pull-ups were something that I liked, but I mean, seeing him just toy with defenders without even moving, I thought was ridiculous, and I thought it was really impressive because he would just jab step, pump fake, jab step, and defenders would bite on it, and then the second they bite, he just rises up and he shoots, and it doesn't matter whether there's a hand in his face, they just, he knocks it down. And obviously Paul George, one of the best ball handlers that at the small forward position, and I mean, he's just a very talented forward as well. A lot of people would call him Kyrie Irving if he was 6'8", and I'm not really sure if that's a good comparison or not. Let me know what you guys think. And then, of course, Russell Westbrook. Now, I know my opinion on Russell Westbrook isn't that great, now, but this is because of the previous years that he's had. Before he had that year with Houston and with Washington, because around the time with Washington, that's sort of when I just didn't really like his game. But when he was on OKC and when he was winning that MVP, and then the year after, I was a very big fan of Russ when he won that MVP. And, I was just a big fan of his mid-range pull-up and, just the fact that he could use that pull-up when people thought he was going to drive. It was such a clean pull-up, and it would almost always go in. But throughout the years, he sort of started to lose that ability. And because he started to lose that ability, I was just, I just got upset, and I haven't really liked his game ever since. But they teamed up. In 2018, they teamed up and they tried to form a super team. This was in response to the Warriors and them, bringing in Kevin Durant. The entire Western Conference started loading up with all-star talent to try and combat against the Golden State Warriors that had 4 All-Stars and several Hall of Famers on that roster. And so, this was their response. But unfortunately, they never really got it going. It only lasted for 1 year, and then Carmelo Anthony went over to Houston, and then Houston immediately waived him after 11 games, and in the final game, Carmelo Anthony went 1 for 11 or something like that. It was really, really bad. And people were calling him washed. People were calling him this, that, and the other. And then he goes over to Portland, and he shows that he could still play basketball. And then he plays with LeBron on the Lakers and just, doesn't work out either. And then as for Paul George, he stays with OKC for 1 more year, but then immediately gets traded over to the Clippers, where he was supposed to win a championship, but we all know exactly how that went. And then after his time with the Clippers, he's gone to Philly. So obviously, this roster, the OKC, they've come a long way. And coincidentally, they still have, the talent, and they've made it farther without Russell Westbrook, Carmelo Anthony, and Paul George now than with Russell Westbrook, Carmelo Anthony, and Paul George. Now, obviously, the attempts to rebuild the roster in response to Golden State, they were facing challenges, and they were struggling to maintain momentum due to internal issues between management and players. So, apparently, according to this article, during the 2017 offseason, the Thunder boosted their roster by acquiring Melo and Paul George. Now, despite high expectations, their time together was short. Like, this is just, I'm reading off of the article. Now, both players opened up about their experiences and what went wrong during their stint on the Thunder during an appearance on the 7 p.m. in Brooklyn podcast. Carmelo Anthony recalled a pivotal moment with then head coach Billy Donovan. He said, quote, "I was working with Sam Presti, who we were able to figure a deal out. Billy Donovan called me in Paris, and he was like, we want to start developing Jeremy Grant into the lineup. He is younger." And I was like, okay, cool. Just tell me you want me to accept that role. I am willing to work with you. He was like, nah, we don't think it is going to work here anymore, Anthony revealed. So they just kind of went away with him, it seems like. And it's very odd because Jeremy Grant doesn't even play for the Thunder anymore, and it's like, really? Like, that completely backfired. So then George echoed Anthony's words and expressed frustration over the rushed nature of their time together. "I thought the whole process was rushed. I was expecting that we were building something here. We got a trio, we saw what it looks like, and now we have a full training camp next year. I just thought it was rushed and too soon. We were only 1 year in," Paul George said. And I mean, like, Carmelo Anthony's departure from the Thunder came as a surprise to a lot of people, especially given the recognition that accompanied his arrival. After just 78 games, the Thunder traded Carmelo Anthony to the Hawks. And, you know, everyone knows what happened with Melo on the Hawks. He immediately got waived, and then he decided to go to the Houston Rockets. Like, they immediately just got rid of Carmelo Anthony on the Hawks. Like, he never played a single game for the Hawks. And during his time with the Thunder, this was the first season that Carmelo Anthony did not average 20-plus points per game. And this was sort of like, a lot of people consider this as the downfall for Melo. And quite frankly, I don't think he was utilized that well. I genuinely don't think he was utilized as much as he should have been because, let's face it, Russell Westbrook, despite having 3 other All-Stars on the team, he still had a ridiculously high usage rate. And the fact that Melo was designated as a catch and shooter is kind of pointless and degrading. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and say that his play style is, very, helpful for many teams. It's cool to watch, but it's not that helpful. I will admit that it's very inefficient the way that he plays. But I don't care because it is so fun to watch. Now, Paul George was, according to this article, brutally honest take with his, Los Angeles Clippers stint, experienced, a similar fate. Although his stay was slightly longer, it seemed like everything was rushed with the organization. And in a way, it kind of was, because it was like it seemed like OKC was expecting them to win right now and pair them up now and immediately, boom, they're going to perform very well. But that's not the case. It's not how Golden State, it's not as easy as Golden State made it look, where they had, a team, they added Kevin Durant, and then boom, they just immediately won the championship. Obviously, that team was just far better than the Thunder's roster, but that's not how it works. You don't usually just put one player on the roster and then you immediately win the finals. That's not really how it works. But it seems like that was sort of the approach that the Thunder wanted to go with. But aside from that, that is all that I have to talk about in this next segment. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought of OKC's duo, or trio, my bad, and their time in OKC. Obviously, they were rather disappointing, and obviously, you would have expected them to do a little bit more in the postseason, but I digress. So now we will go ahead and go into the 5th and the final segment, where I talk about the next game that's going to be happening at 3 o'clock, the United States going up against South Sudan. It is highly anticipated, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about that right after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this final segment, I am going to be talking about the next game that's going to happen today. The United States going up against South Sudan, and probably going to be, a matchup that everyone is looking forward to, especially South Sudan. I mean, they came really, really close to beating the United States in the previous game in their, exhibition round, and now they have a chance to sort of capitalize on that and beat them again. So, this isn't going to be like a long segment. I'm just going to talk about what I think is going to happen and what happens if depending on what team wins what, So that's all that I'm really going to do in this segment. So the South Sudan and the United States, they are the only remaining teams in the Group C standings that are flawless. So they're the only teams that have the ability to qualify right here and right now in this group phase, right? So if either team wins, they qualify. And that's really what both of those teams are looking for. And with the results of this game, that's just going to, because the previous game, Serbia and Puerto Rico, that was rather meaningless. And because, they're still at the bottom part of their standings. They're still in the bottom of the list in the Group C standings. And now, like I said in the previous section, and the previous segment, Serbia is waiting on the United States to win. And so, essentially, if the United States win in this matchup, they will have a 2-0 record, a 2-0 record, and therefore they would qualify for the Olympics. And then later on, they would have to play Puerto Rico, and that game, that's just going to be an easy game for the United States, right? But South Sudan, they would have to, if they lose to the United States, they would have to go up against Serbia in the next matchup, and that would be the game of the Group C standings. They would have to beat Serbia if they would want to, go into the next round and compete for an Olympic gold medal. And Serbia, they would also have to win if they want to keep their hopes and dreams alive. So, they're going to be fighting for their country. They're going to be fighting for everything, and that's going to be a highly anticipated game if the United States wins, though. Because if South Sudan, if they surprise the world and they beat the United States here, then they would qualify for the postseason. And I'm just gonna call it the tournament, just because. So if I say tournament, it means that the final standing. So they would qualify for the tournament, and the United States would go into fall under 1-1, right? But here's the thing. Then the United States, they would play Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico has sort of shown themselves to be the weakest team in the entire group standings, not just for C, but also for A and B. They have the worst record amongst everyone in both Group C, Group A, and Group B, and they have the worst point differential amongst anyone in Group A, B, and C standings. By far the worst. They have a minus 52 in the point differential since this game. And the only teams that are relatively close to them are both Brazil and Japan, and they have minus 25. Minus 50 is their point differential. So that's only going to get worse after they play the United States. And the fact that the United States, they play Puerto Rico after playing South Sudan, they're just going to wipe the floor with that team. And it wouldn't even matter if they lose to South Sudan today, because they would qualify after beating the Puerto Rican team, something that Serbia wouldn't be able to do, because Serbia would be stuck at, being 2-1, and their point differential would be bad. And, the United States, they would also be 2-1, but they would have the higher point differential by default. Actually, wait, no, I lied. If Serbia, yeah, no, actually the records they would be the same if Serbia ends up beating the South Sudan team. But the big problem would be point differential. So, but they would have already qualified. The way that it's formatted kind of confuses me now that I think about it, because you need to get, obviously you need like to get points, but I think like, yeah, no, it would be determined by point differential if South Sudan ends up winning and they end up losing to Serbia. But that's just like it's such a can of worms when you just actually talk about it and you like try to do the math with the point differential and you try to do the how the way that it qualifies and how it works. But it's like it's really like it's tough, like, because then there was one metric that showed me that okay, they're going to like Canada and like Canada, Germany, and France, they've already qualified for the tournament because they won the 2 games. And because they won the 2 games, they have like plus 4 points in like the group standings. And the only thing that, the only reason why point differential matters is to determine tiebreakers. And that's where the things like, they really confuse me, because it's like teams could end up having the same record, but at the same time, like, it wouldn't matter because of point differential, right? Like, that's not confusing. It's just the way that it was formatted that like immediately confused me, because they were saying that like they immediately qualify, and I'm just like, that's not really how it works. I mean, the United States, they have a very huge chance of qualifying. Like if the United States win in the Group C standings, they 100% qualify. But I'm not entirely sure how it'll work if the South Sudan team, if they beat the United States, then their record would be 2-0, right? So sure, it would make sense that they qualify. But then when they play against Serbia, and if Serbia beats them, then they will be 2-1. And Serbia, they would also be 2-1, because right now they're 1-1. And then the United States is going to have to play against Puerto Rico, and they're most likely going to go 2-1. So when all 3 of those teams go 2-1, then it would seem, then I believe that they are going to have to go to point differential to determine which team ends up making it out. So, and right now Serbia seems to be in the lead in terms of point differential between South Sudan, and it's really like, I think it's all dependent on just how much they beat the United States and just how much the United States beats South Sudan, because depending on how the United States depending on how South Sudan beats the United States could dramatically change how point differential is going to affect each of the teams. But if South Sudan, if they get absolutely destroyed by the United States, it wouldn't matter, because then Serbia and South Sudan would still have to play against each other, and they would still have to try and win in order to get the better record. But that's really like all that I have on this segment, because like the standings, they are a little bit confusing when you look at the graphic that the Olympics, they show you, saying that like, oh, this team qualified, oh, this team already qualified, because there's no real guarantee. Now, for Germany and Puerto Rico, not Germany and Puerto Rico, but for Germany and for France, yes, there is guarantee that they end up, qualifying, because one of the teams is going, because both of the teams below them haven't won a single game, so they're not going to qualify anyway. But the fact that there's a possibility that 2 teams could qualify for the Group A standings, like between Australia and Spain, there's a little bit of a competition there. So we're just waiting on this standing, I believe. And when that happens, I think that despite South Sudan winning, they still have to go up against the Serbian team that also has a chance of winning. So maybe when they get to 2-0, it's not as guaranteed, because I don't think Canada has played either Spain or Greece yet. Like, it's one of those two teams that Canada hasn't played yet, which is probably why they have already qualified. I'm going to go ahead and check to see, because now I'm kind of curious why they qualified. Yeah, no, they have yet to play Spain. So I believe that it doesn't really matter whether or not they lose to Spain or they beat Spain, because then their point differential is going to keep them safe. But at the same time, like, I think they're going to probably have to try and win. But I don't understand, like, how that qualification works. But who knows? Maybe they're only talking about, like, now, like, in the now they've qualified, but later on that could change depending on how point differential works. Because I don't know, that was a bad presentation. That was a bad showing of it. I think that's what it was. That was a really bad way that they showed the standings when they put the what's it called? When they put the points and the based off of the record, like for. The way that the graphic was set up, it wasn't set up based off of record, like, oh, Canada's 2-0, or oh, Australia's 1-1, or Spain is 1-1. It went by a point system. So, like, if you get one win, you get 2 points. If you get one loss, you get 1 point. And so Canada had 4 points because they won the 2 games. Australia had 3 points because they won 1 game, which is 2 points, and then they lost another, which is 1 point, so that means 3. Same with Spain, and Greece, who lost 2 games, ended up getting, 2 points because they lost both of those games. So that's just, some food for thought for those, for you guys that are, like, a little bit confused on how the Olympics calculate their scores. Don't pay attention to that number. I think that's a bad way to look at it. Pay attention to the record and pay attention to how much they win by, because those are really the important stats, and that's what's going to determine who makes it and who doesn't make it. Because I'm sorry, that was really lazy the way that they did that. Now that I think about it, but that is all that I have on this segment. So thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a comment. It really makes a difference, and your support means a lot to us. So remember to subscribe, leave a positive review. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And please remember to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That is GSMCpodcast.net. It helps the show, makes it so much more interactive between myself and you guys. That is all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.